am I going to need to show AI in my next role? I think those who aren't learning how to use AI really are putting themselves at career risk right now.
You have to you change from writer to editor. It's a big change in terms of how we build the code, right?
Don't implicitly believe or expect your team to be using. Make your expectations explicit, give people support, get the buy-in from the leadership, and then start doing it.
Like, how do we learn together, and how do we be more directed than just like use AI? That's not enough of it. That's not a mandate. That's not a strategy. That's hope and a lot of money.
Companies are pumping millions and millions of dollars into adoption of AI, but they lack strategy.
ROI is cost reduction, salary reduction. Can we reduce the amount of people that it takes to build the software? That is the least sexy ROI I've ever heard of, right? So the best ROI is we make a more valuable company, a more valuable product through this process.
So today I invited Scott and Martin, who are two guys who have been around product development teams for decades combined right now, to talk about everything connecting to product development lifecycle and AI. And the truth, the situation might be a little bit more complicated than you think it is. So stay with us and let's get to it.
My name is Martin Wilson. I'm a co-founder and partner at Olo Solutions, and we help modernize product lifecycle and drive value for mid-market software as a service and tech-enabled service companies.
So I'm Scott Varho, in order to sort of explain like how I came to this work, my last stop in my career, most of my career I'd spent on product teams building software solutions, custom software. And then in my last chapter, I joined a company, a product development outsourcing company, 3 Pillar, which is where we met. And there I got to see so many teams, so many companies across the world trying to come together to create more value from software. Saw a lot of interesting patterns, some positive, some anti-patterns. And so now in this chapter of my career, really set out to try to help companies get the most out of their technology investment.
Hello, Scott. Hello, Martin. Welcome to Software Engineering Tales. I think this has been like third time for Scott already.
Wow.
So I'm really glad that you keep coming back.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And today we are all together going to talk about product development lifecycle and how AI comes into play these days, and how this whole thing is changing and transforming. And I know that you both have a lot of insights in this area, so that's why I'm really glad that we could talk it through. So where should we start?
Maybe this idea of AI and what I think it's really worthwhile to talk about the changing landscape. Like, we hear a lot about the hype, we hear a lot about expectations. And I think it might be good to ground us on, like, in this moment of time, this is still a incredibly new technology. And even though the pace and the scope of it, and almost the magical nature of it, is very present in the minds, very present in the economy. Just helping, I think, to ground the three of us on what's really happening in this space.
Yeah, because I have heard some recent stories that there were some studies even that a lot of huge, Fortune 500 companies, when accounted everything in, are actually still losing money on implementing AI and on trying to, implement AI into their processes. So I'm not sure where we are right now.
Well, and it's interesting if you look at like Gartner's hype cycle, right? Where it certainly feels like, and of course, history will tell where we are on the hype cycle at what moment. You unfortunately you can't know where you are until after it's already passed. But there's in the Gartner model of hype cycle, there's the hype, and then there's the trough of disappointment, and then there's normalization. And I still believe, especially because of the amount of money being spent without any real tangible ROI. If you look at what OpenAI is spending, Microsoft, Google, these companies are not making money from AI. They are hoping to make money from AI someday. They are dumping huge amounts of capital into this. And then, of course, you have all the other tool makers and so forth. So, but what's interesting is just that, Pavel, as you bring up, like so many Fortune 500 companies, like really big companies have spent so much money on AI. This intersects so much with why Martin and I are doing what we're doing now, is because unlike Agile and DevOps and continuous delivery, these revolutions that hit product development, like how we practice product, this is, if you asked an investor what continuous integration is, they probably don't know, but everyone's heard of AI and everyone's dreaming. So the amount of pressure on leaders, not only to absorb the amount of information, as Martin was talking about, the pace is so intense, but we're now getting pressure from people who don't know what these tools really are or how they could use them, saying you absolutely need to use them. And so that's creating a really difficult landscape for middle management or CTOs especially, to figure out the moves to make. Like, how do I apply these tools? Where do I apply these tools? Which tools do I pick? How do I set up the humans to move through this, right? I mean, if we want innovation, which I believe everybody still wants innovation, more valuable companies, they're going to have to come together differently with these tools and work together differently. But psychological safety, we just saw the massive layoff announcements are making people nervous, even if you as a leader have not threatened your employees with letting them go, right? Like everyone hears it, they're feeling a certain amount of uncertainty, and that goes all the way up to the CTOs who are afraid they're going to be replaced by somebody who leadership just believes knows AI better. And so it's a really interesting and very difficult time. Meanwhile, the tools are still new. I mean, we're just now getting into another class of AI technologies, the agents. Like we started with machine learning, which was a very different model of working with it. Then we had the LLMs, and co-pilots, right? Like, and I mean little c co-pilot, right? These tools that'll just run alongside you and help you with tasks. And now we're looking at multi-agentic ecosystems that can be more or less empowered. That's a lot of transition in a short amount of time. And we talk about AI as a monolith, but it's actually these different classes of technology, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was
even
a long answer.
Yeah. Yeah, but even on like between the front line users, like between engineers, there is so much fear of missing out and so much exploring and everything. And I'm not sure if in some cases it's better, or do you have experience if it's better when the change comes from ups, like down up, or is it better if the leadership, the management takes some strategic decision and maybe bring in some external consulting, and then decide, okay, this is the way we should go, and then iterate this change throughout the levels of the company.
It's interesting because I've seen both advocated in articles from folks, right? Like we should definitely be bottom up or we should definitely be top down. And Martin and I have developed frameworks that say it's not either or, it's both and. And so really what we should be doing as leadership is saying, yes, this is a direction we're willing to spend money, and we want to make progress towards something. So articulate the something in terms of direction, and then create the structures for people to be able to collaborate on how to execute on that best. Because fully top down and fully bottom up will very rarely get you to any significant movement, right? If it's top down, you just don't know enough of the nuances of what it takes to make these things work. And if you mandate it, then you're basically saying, I'm not curious enough to learn something I don't know. I just expect these things. Whether or not they're possible, that's that's not my problem. You're supposed to make it happen. Right. And so that high expectation. And then the folks below need the support systems. Like they're not going to innovate, do big innovations themselves, right? They're not going to be able to push a systems level.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we have to think about product development as a factory, right? A single worker can't change the way the factory works, right? So we need to be working together on like what are the systems that really add value for us and allow us to do better work, either higher quality, more throughput, more innovative ideas, whatever it is, right? Like we can optimize for these different things, but you really need both to come together, not either or.
And so an example of how this might look is if you're a CTO, CPO, director of engineering, you're obviously you've got a day-to-day job, you're deploying technology, you're managing a team, you're trying to get software out, figure out customers, you've got all the work you're doing. And then if you want to start implementing AI beyond just like tinkering, but you understand this is important for your career, it's important to start getting your team used to this technology. I think there's a few things that are worthwhile thinking about. And Elon Molek has written quite a bit about this, and he has a structure that matches a lot when we think about change management and how you get people to use. But there's really kind of three big components of that. It's leadership buy-in, which we really strongly advocate for. That you need to get some air cover for leadership because this is going to take time and energy. This is not a zero-sum cost. So you need to get leadership buy-in and support for doing this work. Two, you need to develop kind of a learning best practices. Hopefully you already have a continuous discovery mechanism, but if not, you need something when things start to work. How do you help move the organization to use this technology to get the benefits? And then the third thing is, how do you get people within your organization from a bottom-up perspective, trying new things out and seeing what works or not? And we know some things are not going to work, but so if you do that at all three mechanisms, now you can incrementally start trying out new technologies, seeing how they impact the team, seeing what works, and then having a mechanism for taking those things that do work and making them standard across the team. And as we know from our experience with continuous innovation, that if teams are good at doing that, the bar slowly gets raised. And so you don't make big leaps of 50% overnight, but 1% every week, right? Or 5% every month, or little incrementals. Those things really add up over time. So there are mechanisms to do that we know already exist within the agile environment. But I think being more intentional, and this is the thing Scott and I talk about, is don't implicitly believe or expect your team to be using. Make your expectations explicit, give people support, get the buy-in from the leadership, and then start doing it and showing and evangelizing and demonstrating progress.
And something that Martin and I have really focused on helping leaders with is also being careful not to pick where or how you're going to attempt to adopt AI just through the lens of the tool that you want to use or the areas where you're most comfortable, but to actually connect it back to business value. Because a lot of times we're not connecting it to something that matters to the business. The only ROI is cost reduction, salary reduction. Can we reduce the amount of people that it takes to build the software? That is the least sexy ROI I've ever heard of, right? So the best ROI is we make a more valuable company, a more valuable product through this process, right? So ideally, we're freeing up cycles and creativity and the ability to have new ideas or insights on how we can help our customers, our users, get more value from the software we build. That's where we want to get to. So now the question is like, where do we pick? And this is something we've developed a framework around. How do you pick high value parts of the product development lifecycle? Maybe it's tech debt. Maybe it's managing your tech debt and paying that down. We know these tools can be really great at that. If you've got a lot of escape defects or you're way behind on library, like there's and I just say that as an example, just to be provocative, but picking our spots in a way that investors and CEOs can say, okay, I see what you're doing there, and I see how you're really targeting areas that are meaningful to us now, and can create tangible value.
Yeah, I think I see like two dangers. One danger is that if you are too slow and too late, people will start experimenting on their own, and you can have internal policies and everything. And maybe people are more careful in like software development, but if you think about some other professions, in the companies, I think the danger is quite huge, that eventually they will use some private AI for something that was not really good idea to do. And on the other hand, also, as you said, when AI is perceived by leadership only as a mean to like more effectivity and in that cost reduction, basically this is not motivational, right, for people, because it means like, okay, actually it means more work for me for the same benefits, because now I'm supposed to be able to do more with the AI. So how do you deal with that?
That, that is an excellent point. So I think what you're talking about is a few things. One, the internal constraints that companies may have. So let's say the CEO, the board, the CTO, someone is saying we need to be using AI more, and then like the security or legal or compliance team is saying no, 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 you can't use these, or you can only use this tool. So that's, I think, one aspect. Is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about? And then
Yeah.
there's also a very human component of this, which is, and I think especially right now where we're seeing the pendulum swing more in employers' favor. So the pressure is on individuals to do more and more. If I can do my 60-hour-a-week job or 50-hour-a-week job or whatever it is, 45-hour-a-week job, if I can do it in a lot less time using AI, I'm reluctant to share the results, because I may believe that then I'm going to just be asked to do more.
Yeah, you don't really want to set the new standards, right?
And then there's a third element there, which is, I think, and Scott and I have personally encountered this and also seen this in companies where high quality work that's done with AI is seen as less valuable by other people. Like your contribution is less valuable. It's a very human experience. And it's the same reason consulting companies can struggle, because they come in and they help a group and people are like, well, like you did this work, but you had a consulting company help you. Same thing with AI. So I think there's, and I'll turn this over to Scott to talk a little bit more about some of these, but there's kind of the general blockers that happen within institutions around cost, security, legal, compliance, and all very real challenges that need to be overcome. Then there's the personal incentives around, I want to be able to do my job, spend more time with my family. So I'm not going to talk about how I use AI. And then there's also kind of the group and social dynamics of my work is seen as less valuable if I'm doing AI or using AI to finish a deliverable, for instance.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, and I'll go back to the framework that Martin was talking about before from Ethan Mollick. Like, if you can create an environment where we can learn together and talk about it and create a community, then so even if we take both of these, actually, they play really nicely. If you create an open dialogue around these tools, on the one, like, what are the fears that legal or compliance have, and how founded are they? And so, like, okay, well, like, as a team, let's look into that. Like, how likely is it? So if I'm, yeah, we know this as technologists, but you're worried about the data, but the data is not what I'm sending into the AI necessarily, especially if I'm coding. That's business logic. Are you that worried about the business logic? Like, you know, so some of this is an education, and we're all going through that education. And again, these things are moving fast. You have different terms of use on different products. Engineers aren't going to read all those terms of use documentation, but there's room for collaboration here to de-risk these things, or to get risk back into an acceptable level. There's always risk, but so by creating a conversation, you know, really interesting story. I'll tell this really quickly. Another former colleague from Three Pillar, actually, he works in sales consulting, was consulting with a company, and you know, he asked, just kind of as a provocative question, he was like, "So what is your AI strategy or story?" And the CTO or CIO, I can't remember which, said, "Oh, we're not using AI. We're in the health industry, and we're not touching it." And this this consultant, this friend of mine, said, "Well, can your frontline sales reps explain to your customers or your prospects why you're not using AI? Like, is that a documented, well understood stance, and it's strategic and you're marketing on it and so forth, or is this just you?" And like, "Oh, no, this is just me. I made this decision and I talked to the C-suite about it." So no one else in the company knows that you've made this decision or why, and can speak to it as a company. Like, we have decided that this is a strategic decision. And that's pretty common, where you see these conversations happening in leadership, but they're not happening on the ground. And this information is not being shared. There's no engagement. And so the engagement actually is your best defense against all the weird fears, the bloated expectations, or the extreme fears. Is more dialogue and more co-learning, so that you can figure out what you want to do with these tools, and everyone understands why you're doing what you're doing. I think that's the best place you can be.
All right. So, do you have some like real life examples of how it can go really bad in adopting AI?
Yeah, well, you know what? One of the biggest anti-pattern. So we'll start with one that Martin really has developed, and we'll speak more to. But one of the things that we really grappled with is, what are some of the biggest obstacles to really good craftspeople? I'm not talking about people who aren't skilled or creative or whatever, but we're talking about good craftspeople.
Yeah.
What is the most common obstacle that they run into that prevents them from doing their best work? And for us, because I mean, we worked with so many different people in so many different contexts. For us, the pattern that we saw was when ambition, your risk tolerance, your capabilities, and your capacity are out of alignment, right? And this happens a lot. I mean, you know, if you asked any CEO, how big is your ambition, it's unbounded, right? Like, we want to make lots of money, like not just this much money, that much money, and beyond. You know, so it's completely unbounded. But how does your company navigate that ambition? And we typically will call this strategy, right? Like, how do we want to direct our focus over time so that we're achieving goals that are supposed to accrue to again, creating more value? It's the context around the team that matters so much to how well that team performs. At the end of the day, expectation is the mother of disappointment. So how do we right size our expectation? How much velocity should this team be able to do? How much throughput should we be able to do? It's an unknowable question. What's the maximum? And so that creates this tension of, well, maybe I just need to expect more. I need to drive harder. I need to drive the team harder. And the interesting thing about that is you don't necessarily get more creative results. You're not going to get the innovation you're looking for. So Martin, you came up with what we call the ARC framework: ambition, risk, capability, and capacity. Do you want to say some more about that?
Yeah. And I'm not going to take credit. I think this was really the genesis of Scott and I working through some tough, both personal or professional challenges, but also working with clients over the last few years, and understanding it's not just about the deployment of AI or the PDLC, but also the structure around that, which is going to make or break that. So I can talk more about that, but Pavel, you were asking specifically if we've seen bad examples of AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can I got to keep the details a little murky on this for confidentiality, but what I will share with you is, which I think we see a lot, is a new vendor came into a client, had a fixed scope with some time and materials stuff, but a very aggressive, like, we want you to build kind of the first version of this product. We're going to release it, test it, and everything's going to be wonderful. But the company wanted a fixed price bid. And it's a few $100,000 of work to create this first prototype, nothing revolutionary. And what we saw is the company, the vendor used AI to create the product. There was a lot of work on the front end to talk about, like, what did the customers need? What did it look like? So it had a nice looking front end, but it didn't have anything like a design system. And so this was handed off to the client. And when we looked at the back end structure, it was gobbledygook. Every database field was a string. There was no validation checks. So what I think this is a great example of is the kind of the clash that can just happen in a normal business environment where you have a fixed price contract, the vendor needs to get something to you. They spent a lot of time working through, I think, frivolous stuff. And what should this field name be? And then when they built the back end, they coded it all in AI, right? It was Claude, like, create this structure, and everything was a string. So and
Incredibly brittle.
Right? And it really wasn't testable. So I think that's a good example of AI can create code very quickly for you, but if you don't give it the parameters, if you're not clear about it, it's definitely not production ready code. And it literally, when we talked to the vendor, they had created that code in just a few days, because they had spent so much time with the client trying to just, like, get the projects created, get the environment spun up, all of which takes real time. You can't use AI to just magically spin you up an environment, magically figure out how to work together. So I share that not because AI shouldn't be used here, but it ended up creating really bad code, because the structure and the systems around it weren't actually in place.
Well, and you're implying also a requirements problem, because there wasn't clarity on, like, what quality standards does this thing need to adhere to. It was like, just make sure this functionality is there, and we know from experience that focus alone won't produce quality products that are resilient.
But I think there is one important bit, because I think that AI can be shortcut, and incredibly tempting shortcut. And there should be always some, like, minimum quality measures in place. Like, for example, and it's really similar to, like, if your code is tested or not tested, right?
Right.
Because you have different levels of, like, should we use unit tests? Should we just core logic unit tested? And so on and so on. And you can find these requirements or these levels of, like, quality control in many areas. And I think that any code produced by AI should be reviewed.
Any code by anybody, human or bot, should be reviewed.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you just put in bunch of code that was quickly shortcutted through, and you don't do, like, proper quality control on that, you will always have a problem. But it's so fast and so tempting that it's becoming a real problem, because you didn't have this shortcut in the past. Like, what could you do? Okay, you could have something spin up by a bunch of junior devs, and it would be also with problems and with issues, but it was not that convenient shortcut, right?
That's right.
This is much faster, much more convenient, and this is one of the real dangers, I think.
Well, and Pavel, you know this, like, the conversation that I was spearheading at Three Pillar was around what is quality, right? Like, how do we norm on what good looks like? And it's okay to deviate from, like, I never use the term best practices because it bugs me, because we should be using optimal practices. We should be applying the practices that make sense to our context, but we should definitely have a shared sense of what good looks like and then norm on the rules of our ecosystem, right? And that was a very wordy way to say, like, we all need to share a concept of what good looks like, so we're shipping similar quality stuff. And or if we're going to do a prototype or something like that, obviously we can take shortcuts on that. That's fine. But it's an intentional thing, right? And it shouldn't be an accident. And so this is where you really see the power of the crowd, right? That we're talking openly about our AI use. We're learning together. We're improving each other's prompts. We're getting more value out of the tools that are helping us create better and better software, and then also feeding the ecosystem. So let me give you another example of a failure. Somebody that I know is really intimate with this company. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on AI. So their leadership was like, we are not going to be behind on AI. Everybody needs to use AI. So they were tracking adoption. They were like, you can use any tool you want. Everybody can use any tool they want. Well, and then of course, a year later, they're like, okay, so where's the ROI? How many lines of, and this is the greatest metric ever. I don't know why this metric, actually, I do know why this metric is back, but lines of code written by AI. How many lines of code? Give us something. We need to tell the public that we've, done something with all this money. And the answer is they really hadn't done much. Most people were tinkering with them. Some of them made it part of their workflow. Overall throughput wasn't magically 4x as they sort of assumed, even though no study has proven 4x in total throughput on anywhere. A task can take a fourth of the time. That does not mean your throughput of your ecosystem is 4x. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there. But anyway, so this company spent all this money. They have nothing to show for it because they just did a top-down mandate with no real direction, no coordination, and not even the space to be able for folks to talk about, well, what are you doing with your AI tools? And now that we've got all the tools, it's even harder to collaborate with other people because we're not able to improve the ecosystem or how it works because you're on Cursor, you're using Claude, it's all over the place. And so the crowd concept, I think, is a really powerful one. Like, how do we learn together, and how do we be more directed than just like use AI? That's not enough of it. That's not a mandate. That's not a strategy. That's hope and a lot of money. And so obviously they're not getting the return on investment, and it was a significant investment. So that's the failure that really stands out for me, because it really highlights this, like, leadership was all in and now they're looking for their money back. And all the employees are like, you said just use AI. I'm using AI. I did what you asked. But you're not going to get the transformation from that approach.
So you talked a lot about like this top down, that there needs to be direction, there needs to be some clarity on the goal and so on. And what about the down up? What can company do for like engineers like me, to help them get into AI game and really have this clarity on how it will help me, how it can make my day better?
But let's start about, everyone should have a clear understanding of the context in which they work in, and ask themselves some questions about where's their interest in AI technology. Like, I don't think Scott and I are going to make any like broad recommendations of like, you should use these three tools. So much of this is based on the context in which you work in. So do you work in a healthcare environment in which AI is really restricted? Do you work, or there's security implications? Let's say you work for the government. Or are you at a fast moving startup where they're like, you've got to figure this out, like take big risks, try different things. So understand the context in which you work on, and what kind of boundaries you have, I think, is really important. And then overlay and just ask yourself, like, are you in an early adopter mode? Are you interested in this technology? Like, find some areas that you feel some personal and professional passion to start experimenting with this, in trying new things. If you can, we always recommend people learning new things because it's going to put you ahead of the curve. I think those who aren't learning how to use AI really are putting themselves at career risk right now. So I don't, nobody knows where this is going to go, but I think it's important in this moment in time, while these sands are truly shifting, it's a very new, novel technology. This is an important technology to dedicate time to learning. Be better at prompt writing. Figure out one or two areas you can personally and professionally improve. Like, I use it a lot to help me edit and write first drafts because I've always struggled with that. AI is actually pretty darn good at that stuff. And then to answer your question in specifically around, like, what can you do? Try out some things, talk to leadership, talk to your friends within the company, what's working, what's not, and be willing to share those. Ultimately, you may need to, as an individual, say, I'm going to host a lunch roundtable and share some of the things I've been working on and other people are working on. So you may have to bootstrap your way up to this. Scott, I know you have lots of thoughts on this.
You know I do. Sort of obsessed about this stuff. So, for bottom up, I think it's definitely good to encourage the tinkering, right? Like, so some of this is changing our craft, right? Like when if you're coding, if you're hand coding, even if you have the suggest, in an IDE or whatever, like, you're doing the writing, right? You're the one thinking about the task. You're really steeped in the task. When you use, especially if you're on the vibe coding end of, we know there's quite a spectrum when you're using these tools, right? You can just have a more enhanced tab type of experience, or you can be prompting, this is what the task is, and go ahead and try, and I'll review your work. Either way, you have to you change from writer to editor. It's a big change in terms of how we build the code, right? And so I think encouraging adoption, and what I call tinkering, right? Like this, hey, try a couple of tasks, and it's okay if they take a little bit longer than they would have. So we're going to create the safe space for you to be adoption friendly, so you can get licenses to the tools you want to try, tinker, adopt, learn, share, and then, as Martin suggested, start building community, right? This is where the crowd comes back in. We can talk about, like, what's working, what's not. Like, this was weird, and is there a setting that I'm missing here? Like, the type of collaboration that, we know that pride is a really big deal to engineers. Like they can, so it's really hard to say, I don't know how to do this, or this is new and different and weird. So creating safe spaces, I think, to have those conversations, I think if you can do that from the ground, like create the lunch and learn, as Martin suggested, go ahead and do it. I think it's great. Like, you should not be on an island with this stuff. This is a paradigm shift. But the other thing is I would incorporate into your rituals, like your retrospective should include, hey, how's it going with these tools, right? I mean, we would talk about everything else. Why would we not talk about this? What's working, what's not, what could we improve on? And then I think from that, the last piece is, can we create user stories where we intentionally try something, right? Where we say, I'm going to set aside capacity, really. I hate the word velocity because of that. We're going to set aside capacity. And if good ideas come up, we're going to let people go try something and see if it works out. And not with the intention of building something we're going to ship necessarily, but to learn something that then we could take into the lab and make part of our ecosystem more generally, right? So I think that's the best way to create a context where the bottom up can be really effective. Now, I do believe that hits a point. That kind of tinkering will take your current ecosystem to a certain level of advantages leveraging these tools as individuals working the way we do now. However, we're seeing we're starting to see the signs, I think, with the BMAD method, the breakthrough method of agile AI development, which is a multi-agentic ecosystem that you can start running. I think this is just the first of what will be many systems-wide agentic style ecosystems. Now, then at that point, we're going to have to re-engineer the product development lifecycle, the roles, the role definitions, because it's going to be it's just a very different ecosystem to work in. And we don't need to have, the roles laid out the way that we have in the past. Will that lead to workforce reduction? I don't believe so. I believe capital will continue to chase returns, and that will create new jobs. It's going to cause a big shift. And so, as Martin said, I think thinking through your intrinsic motivators, what you like, what you don't like, is important for preparing for that shift, not just playing with the tools, but also understanding where in the ecosystem you derive the most enjoyment and meaning.
Yeah. And what do you think this all will do with like the next generation of juniors developers growing into senior ones?
Oh, that's hard.
Well, one thing that we've been talking about has been how much these tools have allowed people to, because they're lowering the barriers to going outside the lines, right? Now people who can't code can code. Like they can have something produce good stuff. Regardless of how good it is, they can do it. You've got designers writing front end code now. You've got engineers creating prototypes. And this is really where I was kind of pointing to, is we're going to be seeing a different system, and the juniors that are entering the market, I think right now they're coming in with a certain set of expectations that are going to be really tricky, right? And there's a lot of uncertainty in the job market, and Amazon's cutting 10,000 jobs, so there's a little bit of betrayal here, because everyone just said, like, if you learn to code, you're going to have a great career, and now it's like maybe. It's hard to get junior jobs right now. There's a lot of companies that are holding back on junior positions and junior roles because they don't think they need them, because they can hire a bot. So I think that as the next generation comes in, I think they're going to be a lot more fluid about where they can add value, how they can add value. And it'll be really challenging, I think, for the CTOs and VPs of engineering and directors of engineering to navigate that change, because the rules are shifting. And so trying to understand how to build a more inclusive, systemic, innovation-friendly environment for new people to come into, that is the challenge of the next wave of companies doing product.
So I want to make a prediction, which we know is going to be wrong, because anytime someone says, I'm going to make a prediction, guaranteed. But I think what we're going to see, and let's take the university system, for instance, is as this starts to level out, I think our expectations for what junior developers do is going to change, because as Scott was mentioning, the role I believe is going to start morphing. You are going to have junior developers who maybe are a little bit more Swiss Army knife, in that they can do a lot of things. They're very good at AI. So they can do more design, they can do some product stuff, they can do some technology stuff, but they're able to grow into their tech roles. And I think there's a real place for those people working alongside AI agents as they're building. So let's take an example of where that could work and where that couldn't work. I think that would be a real struggle is you take a junior engineer and say, we have an old legacy system. It's written in, let's say, ASP, right? Or some older technology. We need to get rid of the tech debt, use AI and go do it. That probably would fail, because that junior person doesn't have experience with that technology, doesn't know the source code. They really lack the expertise of what a senior developer could bring. But in an environment where, we're building these new products, we need to get some customer feedback. It isn't a large existing code base, or maybe it's an add-on. That could be an area where, with some oversight, working with AI, I think they could be very effective. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to have to see these higher education systems, the fundamentals of what they teach is going to be changing. But this is the same evolution that has happened in higher education for like computer science. I mean, I had to learn writing in binary stuff, right? I had to learn writing machine language and some very basic stuff that 5 years later no one needed to learn in my computer science degree. So I think the higher education will be training people differently. They'll have to for these people to get jobs. Or the other thing you might see is someone who leaves that is just becoming they leave with like an expert in this one language, right? Like they are so good at this one language and learning how to use AI. So again, I think it's an opportunity in higher education, the trade schools, or even for self-learners, but they're going to have to follow a different path than what we're seeing right now, which I think is a little bit more, you leave the school and you have a kind of a more generic, like let's say computer science degree.
Well, and Pablo, you and I were talking just before this actually, and I have an interesting prediction as well. I'll go with Martin's language. I have a prediction, which is that we will see more systemic AI implementations where we're looking at an end-to-end AI assisted ecosystem, which means in a systems thinking view of this, we're able to collaborate on what good looks like, right? That we were having that conversation about quality earlier. So now if we can infuse the system with what good looks like, and every time you check in code, just as you do with static code analysis or unit tests today, you're getting immediate feedback. Ideally, in well-architected systems, you get feedback on your code. Hey, you have SQL injection vulnerabilities in your code. Okay, then they show you where it is, and you go and fix them, and then you recommit, and then it passes, right? What does that do to a junior engineer? That helps the junior engineer in the future not submit code with SQL injection vulnerabilities, right? So you're learning. So you can imagine an ecosystem that can take juniors and ensure or increase the odds, can't ensure, but can increase the odds that whatever it is that they submit is meets those norms of quality, but also you're making the junior now more a stronger engineer. They're getting that feedback. And I know you yourself, Pablo, have had some experience where AI has taught you some things, and it's really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one thing to be able to Google stuff on Stack Overflow, and completely different thing when you can ask very concrete question and get answer which makes sense and actually can lead you to the source of the answer and so on, and this one point in documentation you missed. So yeah, it's very powerful, and I think it can help people to learn and grow faster without slamming seniors with a lot of questions all the time. That's right. So that's one thing also.
And by having the seniors in that ecosystem, they're basically teaching the juniors without having to do all the teaching, right? Like they're infusing that system with the norms of quality and so forth. And then, as you mentioned, the AI can be helpful in some of the whys. Like, I don't understand why we're doing it this way. And so you could even peel some of the layers so that you're enriching your understanding. You're not just learning the particular syntax you need to use to solve this problem, but you can get if you're curious to understand why you're doing it this way, the AI can explain it, which is really nice.
Yeah. And I think the shift is also happening, like as you mentioned, there are different forms of using AI now for coding, and this shift from like writer to editor. I recently read some article on like how so we started with this IDE style solutions like Cursor, and now people who started with that are moving towards CLI tools,
command line interface.
Because they are basically they don't need the whole IDE thing. They just need to prompt and then check the code and then push it into the right direction, and they are working like this very fast. So yeah, interesting times ahead, I guess, and new skill sets to get. Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah. Is there something that throughout last year, 2 years, really surprised you about this whole AI thing? Something you didn't see coming?
Wow, good question. So your question is, in the last year or so, what has
Yeah.
happened that really surprised us?
Yeah.
I think so for me, and Scott and I talk about the AI hype cycle and where are we, and you see LinkedIn, all these things. I think what has surprised me at times is some of the not the naysayers, but the other side of this, the like you'll see these clickbaity things that are, in 6 months every job will be done, right? Or AI will replace every job as we know it. And um, maybe it's a sign of our times, or maybe it's just the human beings. It still amazes me that people read those articles. I mean, I read them because I'm like, I want to kind of tear them apart because they are so hyperbolic. They're based off opinions, not on data. And I know they're very clickbaity, but I think it surprises me that people I know will write things like that. And I think it feeds into the level of uncertainty. And it doesn't really help any of us to see that. Probably the worst article I saw, and that was the MIT article. I think that was saying something like 85%,
95.
95% of AI projects fail. But then when you looked at the underlying data, it wasn't, it was like under 50, and it was mainly sales and marketing, and they didn't actually like have people participate. They like sourced the projects.
It was a survey.
Through surveys, and then
Yeah.
did follow-ups by looking at public releases. So it was very sloppy. But stuff like that doesn't help on either side. So I guess surprised, not surprised, that during times of uncertainty and with the world we live in, how you see, right, either naysayers or doomers or evangelists who prophesize that everything will be different in 6 months. That still kind of shocks me as a human being.
Yeah. That's a great call out, Martin. Because it really is like, it does feel like like so many debates in the world these days feels like a false binary. And,
Right.
and that's a big part of our, the AI Catalyst offering that we've developed is really based on this idea of like, how do you take a principled, informed approach to transformation? How do you navigate this? How do you take into account the psychology of the and again, like, you didn't used to have to worry about it. If you were a CTO, you didn't have to worry about investors, but AI has changed that. Investors are insisting that we're using these tools in some way in our products and in our product development lifecycle. And so that's creating a need for us to be more aligned when you've got the hype cycle. If you're all in on AI, or you believe it's transformative 400% productivity, then you're like, why are we missing out on this? Why haven't we done this yesterday? Like, why would you not be doing this, right? And then if you're on the doom side, you're like, we'll never do this. This is all garbage. It's all, and of course the real answer is it's unclear. There's a lot going on. This is like the 90s for those of you, I mean, probably you're too young, but but Martin and I both remember the .com was like, if you're not going online, if you don't have a website, you're dead. You are done. It's over. And it was crazy to navigate. But, right. So, I think we spend a lot of time tamping down the hyperbolic, but really, I think as leaders, coming back to principles, how do we navigate this? How do we make thoughtful investments, targeted investments where we know where we expect the ROI, slow things down a little bit. But then you do have one constraint here that's really important. And this kind of goes back to our ARC framework. You got to have some trust. And I think that's one of the hardest things in the environment that Martin's describing, in when people are hyping their successes to such an extreme and not talking about the realities. I mean, for every vibe coded app that's been successful, there's a litany of ones that have failed. And we talk about the successes as like, oh, this is the new paradigm, but we need to acknowledge the amount of waste and effort and, you know, poorly built versions that came before, et cetera, or failed apps entirely, things that the AI just couldn't do on its own. But we don't talk about those as much because we're in this hype cycle. So grounding the conversation is 9/10 of what we try to do for leaders, and then help them get back to a principled approach to change. And don't forget the humans. If you leave the humans behind, you will not change. You will not get the value you're looking for. You can't get the ROI without the humans. And so how do you create environments that both challenges them and supports them? But the intensity of the hype cycle has been a lot to weather.
And I guess that's where you can come in and, you know, help with the right expectations and the right execution, right?
Choosing a path that is sustainable over time, right? And then also, how do you anticipate the future when you hit that chasm of like, okay, we're going to need to re-engineer the entire factory now to get the next level of throughput that we want. How do you recognize that? How do you take people up to that line and then over into that journey? Yeah, and that's what we really try to help middle leaders, especially CTOs. A lot of them are getting this pressure. And, you know, managing human psychology is not necessarily the strength of a strong technical leader. They'll tend to go back to the tools. And what we're trying to advocate is for these leaders to get alignment from the investors to the front line and create an ecosystem that can make this change with the minimum amount of breakage.
Yeah. Last time when we spoke together on this podcast, you actually told me something that sticks with me, and that's that the biggest motivator is fear. And, you know, different roles fear different things. What would you say that is the biggest fear connected to AI for someone in, like, you know, C-level position in software product company, someone in the middle in, like, I don't know, tech lead position or CTO position, and for like engineer in the front lines?
So another way to say that is maybe the three different levels, right? The executive C-suite, the middle manager level, and the individual contributor levels, specifically like right in a product design, QA, engineering. Yeah. You want to take a shot at that, Scott?
Sure. So it's interesting because when Martin and I started Olo and we started thinking about the different roles, so I want to speak specifically to leadership, and we went around and we thought about, like, what does the head of marketing fear the most? What does the head of sales fear the most? What does the CEO fear the most? You know, again, born from this insight that humans are far more motivated by fear, by risk or failure aversion, than they are by goals. And as we thought about this, and I could ask you this question, Pavel, but you can imagine a CTO's worst day is a security breach, right? And, you know, a CTO and a halfway decent CTO knows that a security breach is just it's a matter of time and whether or not someone's motivated enough to breach the system, right? Spend enough money, enough time, you can break any system. So trying to think through, so this kind of brings us back to quality in an interesting way, right? Like, so if a CTO is thinking about that, the possibility of a breach, they need to be balancing, you know, a productivity gain against the risks, and really thinking through the risks. So at that level, and then it's important to know, like, your head of sales, like their number one fear is missing a quarterly target for sales. That's how they lose their job, right? So if you go around the table, customer, you know, account management is worried about losing your biggest client. And so you can imagine when you stir in AI into this mix of these different fears, it plays on all of them simultaneously, right? Because, you know, your head of sales is thinking, hey, if you can just give me some AI features, that'd be really cool. That'd really pump up my demos. That would get me more calls. That would, like, come on, man, like, you know, help me out. You can imagine the CEOs thinking, I could spend half the money and get twice the software. The CFO is certainly thinking that. Right. So when you stir in AI and the hype cycle that we described, and you mix in the fears, it gets very interesting. But I'm just going to talk about that level. I'll let Martin talk about the other levels.
So Scott, I think, did a good job of talking about the top level. If we break down the middle management level and an individual contributor, I'm gonna ask you about the individual contributor, but I think the middle manager, that role has always been a tough role because you get squeezed between the ambition of the executive levels, the risk tolerance in which they want you to operate, and you're really relying on your individual contributors to manage risk well. And then you always have these capacity and capability challenges. And you never meet a middle manager that's like, yeah, I've totally got the ability to do everything we want to do. So they are constantly measuring, kind of juggling pressures and setting expectations, both down and up and across.
Ambition, capacity.
Yeah, right. And so those, historically, that's just it's a tough role. And there was an infamous Super Bowl commercial by Monster, I think in the 2000s. It was making fun of like kids' goals in the future, and one of the kids got on and says like, "I want to claw my way up to middle management," and it was like a joke of like, "What do you really want to be in life?" Nobody says I want to claw my way up to middle management. So let's take that in context,
That was a
and
great
then
call.
apply the pressure on AI, which again can be very unrealistic at this time, right? The amount of C-level executives we've talked to that have used like an LLM and been like, it's amazing. Why can't you use it for anything? Like, I had it put together a shopping list for me, or help me put together a board presentation. You're like, yeah, sometimes it's really good at stuff. Sometimes it's really bad. And you even if you write a good prompt, it creates things, and you realize 2 hours later that it was like making stuff up. And you wasted all that time. So I think when you look at that middle management level, they're trying to figure out how they can use AI, how they can work with their teams to use AI, right? How they get that leadership support. It goes back to that. You need leadership support. You need to build out like a training change management group, and then you need to get your individuals using that stuff. And that is a lot of challenge because they're already under a lot of pressure. And I think so they're worried about their abilities to deliver. I think the other thing they're thinking about is, am I going to need to show AI in my next role? Right. So whether it's a year from now, 2 years, 3, 4, what do I need to show in order to be employable in my next role? And oftentimes they don't know the answer. But for a lot of these roles, you're gonna need to show some kind of tangible progress to implementing AI within your teams, building the right system. What results did you get? Those who can tell a coherent, clear story of, I saw this opportunity, I did it this way, here's the results, here's why it delivered value for the business, they're going to be much better positioned for their next opportunity. So I think, going back to what Scott said, there's some fear there, and also this realization that I need to be doing this, but I'm not sure how.
The biggest fear is that if I don't hop on the AI train, soon enough, I will not have secured my future in this area. So that's that's one thing. And the second thing, which is more like, I didn't do enough coding with AI yet, so I can't tell, but I have a feeling that sometimes it makes you, a little bit lazy, a little bit like don't feel like going through the challenge, but around the challenge. I see it in like, I it's sometimes it feels like that when when you are when you are drafting, for example, article on something.
Right.
So I quite often do like summarizing, posts around these episodes. And I used to do that all by hand. Now I have transcript, I use ChatGPT, and I ask for some interesting, points and first draft, and it just streamlined my efforts from like, I don't know, 5 hours to like 1 hour, right? But you still feel a little bit like, okay, did I actually miss something because I took the shortcut, or he could could it have been better? But then I remind myself of the Pareto rule every time. So I think 80% is good enough.
Right.
But yeah. So these are my fears.
But
basically.
knowing when it's such a key piece of judgment as craftspeople to know when close enough is good enough, right? Because you do this all the time when if you took 2 hand coding tasks, you made decisions along those lines then as well. But because it's a different experience, it's a different process, it feels like you're taking a bigger shortcut. And obviously you are, but close enough is good enough. And so if you can get yourself, clear about that, then it's a little bit easier to deal with the fear. But it was interesting. I want to tell this quick story. A CFO friend of mine vibe coded a very small app, and then after that told me it was amazing. If you were and we had worked together in a previous company, and he's like, if you remember that one monolithic PHP application, this giant acquisition that we did, it was a very difficult to work with this piece of software. He was like, we could have recoded the entire thing in a weekend. And the best part about this is, like, just for those of you who don't know, you can't put a large code base in any tool. It can't handle it. Its memory is not big enough. It does not have a big enough context window to handle that. It would not have been able to do that. They still can't do that. And we're about a year after he said that to me. We still can't do that. So, again, I think that when the expectations and the realities are rubbing up against each other so much, and people think they know things, and they firmly believe or have these convictions, that creates the biggest obstacle. That's my biggest fear, is being in that environment where I can't get leaders on the same page in terms of what right sizing expectations, because otherwise you're just managing failure and disappointment all the time, and I think that can be a really difficult context to succeed in.
Yeah, and I think this makes for a great take-home message. Be be very careful about your expectations when it comes to AI, because all sorts of problems come from this, right?
So I think, well, you hit on something that's really important there, which is, for all this talk of AI, oftentimes AI is not the big elephant in the room with the companies. So AI, I think, oftentimes right now is a bigger source of distraction, and diffuses focus, where we have seen in the last few years, and I think continue to see with the work we do, the biggest opportunity is in coming into these mid-market SaaS companies and tech-enabled service companies, and helping them understand and we talked about the ARC framework, ARCC, right? So your ambition, your risks, your capabilities, and capacity. So what you actually, the structure around how you build products. And then, so if you think about that wrapper, and then inside that, how you actually are doing your PDLC, right? Are you doing unit test, regression test? Do you have a healthy and modern PDLC that can address tech debt efficiently? Does continuous feedback with your customers, continuous improvement, things like that. Now you can add AI to those things, but if you put AI just into your PDLC, oftentimes what you're doing is you're putting lipstick on a pig. And software is still so expensive to develop. If you're getting a 1 or 2% increase through AI, in what you build, but you're not actually doing a great job at building your products, you don't have a clear, coherent strategy in the market that allows you to go out and execute at speed, okay, so you add AI. That's not really where your problem. So if you're a CEO, if you're a board member, if you're a C-level executive, if you're a director, what you really need to be thinking about is, do we have a clear and coherent strategy that we can execute at speed, that is also not rigid, right? We take that, we work with it, and then within our PDLC, are we efficiently spending ROI, or sorry, are we getting sufficient ROI out of this and executing effectively? So, and if you don't know, and this is what we see a lot, is people don't actually know, like, can I execute on a clear and coherent strategy in an effective manner? And if you can't, then don't look to AI. Think holistically about your system. And this is where we recommend people take the ARC framework. You can apply it yourself. You can look, and that will help answer that question of, do we have a clear and coherent strategy that we can execute at speed? And if the answer is I don't know or no, you've got different work to do than AI.
Yeah, thanks. That was great conclusion to today's talk. And yeah, I guess until next time, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Pavel. This is great.
Thank you.